He stole my father's legacy right at his memorial in front of city officials. The walls exposed everything before he could escape, humiliated and forced to disappear. He fired me at my father's memorial site. Right there, in front of the stone my dad laid with his own hands 40 years ago, Damien Locke looked me dead in the eye and said, "Julian, your services are no longer required." That's a sentence you don't forget. I'm Julian Carter, 36 years old. And up until that day, I was the lead heritage architect for Heritage Nexus, a nonprofit that's supposed to preserve historical sites across the East Coast. You know, the kind of places that hold real stories. Real blood and sweat in every brick. But let me tell you something. Behind all that mission talk and glossy fundraising brochures, it's nothing but backroom deals and men like Damien playing Monopoly with real history. 2 years ago, I left a stable job and a decent paycheck because this project, the restoration of the Marlowe Opera House, was personal. My dad spent the last years of his life working on that building. He loved it so much he used to say, "When I'm gone, I want my name to live on in those walls." Well, Damien had other plans. See, the Marlowe Opera House was more than a building. It was a symbol of this city's resilience. But to Damien, it was just another prime piece of real estate, sitting right in the middle of a development goldmine. I should have seen it coming. 6 months before the grand reopening, I noticed strange things. Original stained glass windows I fought hard to preserve were suddenly too expensive to restore. Artisan stonework was quietly replaced with machine-cut imitations, and every time I raised concerns, I got the same response. "Julian, don't be so emotional. It's just business." But it wasn't just business to me. It was my father's legacy. I worked 80-hour weeks, skipped holidays, lost the woman I loved because I couldn't walk away from this fight. And right when we were weeks away from unveiling it to the public, Damien pulled the rug out from under me. He walked me out, literally out, during a final inspection at the memorial site. Told me the board had unanimously voted to transition leadership to someone with a more modern vision. And then, as if that wasn't enough, I saw it. Hanging in his office, behind the smoked glass window, was my father's original signed blueprint, framed like some corporate achievement. His signature barely visible in the corner, like a whisper Damien was trying to claim as his own. That's when something inside me broke. But I didn't shout. I didn't throw punches or cause a scene. I smiled, because what Damien didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 6 months ago, when I first smelled the rot in his plans, I started making plans of my own. While Damien was out whining and dining investors, I worked late nights adding tiny, nearly invisible details into the building's design, ones that wouldn't show up until the right moment. Let's just say, the Marlowe Opera House has a few secrets, and they're about to be very public. I walked out of that building that day carrying nothing but a box of my things. But what I left behind? That's going to speak louder than any words I could have thrown at him. And the best part? They already scheduled the grand reopening gala for next Friday. Full media coverage, live TV broadcast, Damien's big victory lap. Yeah, he's going to regret inviting that kind of spotlight. You ever feel like your whole life leads up to a single night? That's how I felt walking up to the Marlowe Opera House on the night of the grand reopening. Suits and gowns everywhere. Champagne flowing like tap water. Flashbulbs popping as if Damien Locke was some kind of celebrity instead of the fraud he really was. And there he stood, center stage under the blinding lights, drinking it all in like he actually deserved any of it. I stayed in the shadows, tucked near the rear entrance like a ghost haunting my own story. My name wasn't on the guest list, but it didn't need to be. Because the building itself was about to tell everyone exactly who I was. See, while Damien was busy slapping his name on plaques and smiling for the cameras, he never noticed the subtle adjustments I made to the lighting system. The Marlowe was famous for its stained glass dome, a masterpiece my father helped design. What nobody knew, except me, was that under the right sequence of lights, that dome could do more than just look pretty. It could reveal the truth. I felt my phone buzz. 8:55 p.m., right on schedule. The lights inside the hall began to shift. At first, just a soft glow. Then, one by one, the overhead projectors kicked in, filtering ultraviolet patterns through the glass. And then, it happened. Gasps echoed through the hall. Because right there, across the entire ceiling, like some divine judgment written in light, were the names of every subcontractor Damien had cut illegal deals with, every shady bank account, every falsified permit, projected across the walls, the floor, even the marble pillars. Receipts, bank transfers, signatures. And at the center of it all, my father's blueprint, his real, original design, lit up over the main stage. His signature, glowing proudly for the first time in decades, larger than life. I watched from the wings as Damien's face went from smug to pale in under 5 seconds. One of the investors turned to him, eyes wide. "Damien, what the hell is this?" And right there, under that cathedral of light built on lies, his entire empire began to collapse. He tried to play it off, grabbed the mic and chuckled nervously. It's an artistic tribute, a nod to transparency. But you could hear it in his voice. That crack, that tiny fracture in his polished facade. And then came the final blow. The fire alarm went off. Except it wasn't the actual alarm. It was the hidden sound system I'd wired into the building months ago, tied to the same lighting sequence. The sound that played? It was a recording. Of Damien. Bragging during a private dinner I'd secretly recorded through a hidden mic tucked into the very walls he claimed as his own. The Marlowe's just another stepping stone. History doesn't pay. Luxury condos do. These idiots love their nostalgia, but they'll trade it for a penthouse view any day. His voice echoed through the grand hall like a confession in a courtroom. That's when security moved in. Investors pulled out their phones, some already dialing their lawyers. And me? I walked out into the night, unnoticed, my hands shoved deep into my pockets and my father's wedding band pressed tight between my fingers. The Marlowe had spoken for me. And for the first time in 2 years, I could finally breathe. I thought I was prepared for anything. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what I saw when I stepped into that boardroom. 2 days after the gala, I got a call from one of the Heritage Nexus board members. She sounded nervous, said they were holding an emergency meeting about recent revelations and my presence was strongly encouraged. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to just disappear, leave them to clean up their own mess. But then I thought about my father, about that signature glowing in front of the whole city. I owed it to him to see this through. So there I was, standing outside that heavy oak door, palms sweating like I was back in high school waiting to get expelled. When I finally walked in, every head turned. Damien sat at the far end of the long conference table, shoulders slumped, tie discarded, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in days. The board chair, Evelyn Marks, cleared her throat. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice tight, formal. "Do you have any explanation for the spectacle you orchestrated at the Marlowe reopening?" I took a slow breath, looked around the room at faces that had ignored me for 2 years straight, and said the only thing that felt honest. "I did what I had to do," I told them, "because none of you were listening." The room went quiet. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner like it was a damn siren. Evelyn exchanged a look with the legal counsel sitting beside her. And then she slid a folder across the table. I opened it, expecting some sort of lawsuit or cease and desist order. But it wasn't that. It was a contract, an offer. They wanted me to take over as executive director of Heritage Nexus. Full leadership, control over project decisions, and most shocking of all, 50% voting rights on the board. I couldn't believe it. For 2 years, they treated me like a sentimental fool clinging to the past. Now, suddenly, they wanted me to be the face of the organization? I glanced over at Damien. He wouldn't even look at me. But here's the part that really twisted the knife. As I flipped through the contract, there was an addendum. Small print at the bottom. A condition. They wanted me to publicly state that the incident at the Marlowe was a misinterpretation, that I had acted out of emotional distress, and that Damien's leadership, despite its flaws, had always been well-intentioned. In other words, they wanted me to clean up their mess, validate their failures, and pretend the last 2 years of gaslighting, betrayal, and heartbreak were just a misunderstanding. I felt my heart crack right there in that boardroom. They didn't want to fix anything. They just wanted a new shield to hide behind. And I was supposed to play that role with a smile. I stood up, slid the folder back across the table, and for the first time in months, I spoke from a place deeper than anger. "You can't buy integrity," I said quietly, "and you sure as hell can't rent mine." I walked out, and here's the twist no one saw coming. Not even me. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone was already buzzing with news alerts. Turns out the investors had pulled the plug on Nexus's biggest funding deal. But it wasn't because of the scandal. It was because Damien Locke had disappeared. Just vanished. No one's seen or heard from him since that night. His phone disconnected. His penthouse emptied out overnight. The police classified it as a voluntary disappearance. But there are whispers. Money moved offshore. A private jet chartered under an alias. That man built an empire on lies and burned it to the ground the moment it stopped serving him. And somehow, that hurt more than anything. Because I spent so long fighting him, waiting for the day he'd have to answer for what he did. But some people don't stay and face the music. They just run. And if I'm being honest, I don't know what's worse. Losing the fight or realizing there was never going to be one. If you've ever been there, left standing in the ashes of something you built with your whole heart, I just want to say, I see you. And if you're still holding out for closure, sometimes the hardest part of healing is accepting that you might never get it. But that doesn't mean you stop trying to build something better. It just means next time you build it for yourself. And no one gets to put their name on it but you. You ever reach that point where the anger just stops burning and turns ice cold? That's where I was, standing in the wreckage of everything Damien Locke thought he controlled. And for the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt dangerous. But here's the thing about revenge. If you play it loud, people see it coming. If you play it quiet, it hits them before they even realize they're under attack. And I'd spent months preparing for this, while Damien was busy parading himself around the city as the savior of heritage architecture. I was sitting in my tiny apartment at 3 a.m., poring over the Nexus financial records I'd quietly copied before he had me escorted out. Line by line, transaction by transaction, I followed the trail. And you know what I found? Hidden beneath layers of shell companies and fake consulting firms was a real estate acquisition deal, tied directly to the Marlowe Opera House. The plan was sickeningly simple. Restore the Opera House just enough to slap a historical preservation stamp on it. Use that to drive up the surrounding property value. Then, in 6 months, sell the land under the Opera House to a luxury condo developer. And the worst part? They'd already filed the preliminary paperwork. It was scheduled to be finalized at the next city council meeting. A vote no one knew about because, on paper, it was hidden under a harmless zoning amendment. That's when it hit me. They weren't just stealing my father's legacy. They were planning to bulldoze it. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. The city council meeting was public, but no one ever really attended those things. It was just bureaucrats rubber stamping each other's bad decisions while the public sat at home, blissfully unaware. I walked into that chamber with a USB drive in my pocket and a plan. When the agenda item came up, item 47B, zoning adjustment for future development consideration, I stood up. Heart pounding so hard I thought my ribs might crack. "Excuse me," I said, loud enough to cut through the council president's monotone reading. "I think you're about to vote on something that'll destroy one of the last historical landmarks this city has left." Every head turned. I plugged the USB into the public display system and pulled up everything. Financial records, shell company links, copies of emails between Damien and the developers, laughing about how no one would notice until the wrecking balls showed up. And then, the final slide. A digital recreation of the Marlowe Opera House overlaid with the planned Marlowe Skyline residences, a 30-story glass monstrosity that would erase the last stone my father ever touched. The room went dead silent. But here's the twist. The moment that made every hair on my body stand up. Before the council could even respond, the lead developer listed on those documents, Stephen Locke, walked into the chamber, and I recognized him immediately. Damien's older brother. The whole time, this wasn't just corporate greed. It was a family operation. A dynasty of quiet corruption, playing the long game to reshape the entire city for their personal fortune. I stood there, stunned, as Stephen Locke calmly approached the council table and said, "Gentlemen, I believe we should postpone this item until we have time to reassess." And just like that, he walked out, leaving behind a room full of confused officials and a ticking time bomb of scandal. That night, I didn't sleep. Because it hit me. This wasn't just about the Marlowe anymore. It was about everything we lose when we stop paying attention. So if you're reading this and you've ever been told to let it go or move on, I'm here to tell you, don't. Sometimes standing up isn't about winning. It's about making damn sure the people who try to erase you remember your name, even if it's written in stone. And after what I just uncovered, believe me, this story isn't over. Not by a long shot. I don't know what I expected when I walked back into the Marlowe Opera House one final time. Maybe I thought I'd feel victorious. Like this long, bitter war was finally over, and I'd stepped out the other side as some kind of hero. But that's not how it felt. The air inside was heavier than I remembered. The grand hall sat in silence, stripped of the false glory Damien Locke tried to slap on it. The lights were off, the seats covered in dusted sheets like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting. And then, as if the universe knew the curtain was about to fall, my phone buzzed. Breaking news. Damien Locke indicted on multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. I stood there, staring at that headline until my vision blurred. He was finally going to pay. Not just with his reputation, but with his freedom. Turns out the financial records I dumped at the city council meeting triggered more than a canceled vote. It kicked off a full-blown federal investigation. And while Damien thought he was untouchable, hiding behind his brother's shadow, the paper trail didn't lie. Neither did the Marlowe. The very walls he tried to whitewash had recorded every step of his betrayal. But here's the part that stuck with me. The part I didn't see coming. When the feds raided Damien's penthouse, they didn't just find hidden accounts or false ledgers. They found a framed letter. My father's letter. The original one he wrote to the city council 4 decades ago, pleading to preserve the Marlowe Opera House. Signed in his careful, looping handwriting. Damien had kept it all these years, hung it in his office like some sick trophy. And for reasons I can't explain, that broke me more than anything else. This man had everything: money, influence, connections. And yet he held on to that letter. Proof that no matter how much he tried to erase our legacy, a part of him knew he'd never build anything worthy of his own. That's the thing about people like him. They collect the symbols of greatness because they'll never create it themselves. I left the opera house that night for the last time, my father's letter safely tucked inside my jacket. I didn't need the building anymore. Because the real legacy? It wasn't stone or steel. It was knowing that when it mattered most, I stood my ground. And as I crossed the empty plaza outside, the winter wind cutting sharp against my skin, I realized some victories don't echo through applause. They whisper in the quiet, where you finally feel free. The lesson I learned? You don't fight for closure. You build it. One painful brick at a time. And when it's done, you don't hang a plaque. You just move on. And hey, if you've been through something like this, if you're still standing in the rubble wondering if it was worth it, drop a comment. Share your story. Let's remind each other. Some legacies can't be stolen, they're lived. And if you're still building yours, You're already further along than you think.